Even if they're wildly interesting in concept, level monsters have been, dare I say, a complete disaster from a competitive standpoint. Think long and hard about the last time, if ever, you remember seeing a level-based deck at the top tables of a significant tournament you were attending. If you're drawing a blank, don't worry, that just goes to illustrate my point. Konami has introduced many less than impressive subtypes and mechanics over the years, like Gemini, Union, and Spirit, but you can probably make a compelling case that level monsters have been the biggest disappointment out of the bunch. But fear not, there was once a legitimate ray of hope in the sea of level-themed mediocrity, and as unbelievable as this may sound, that ray of hope rose to be a feared and respected meta contender at the highest level. In this video, you'll learn about that competitive juggernaut, how and why it worked, and most importantly, what separated it from the rest of its failed level brethren. Welcome to the story of the Royal Horus deck. We're going to focus on the OCG side of things and go back to May 2004. Despite being heavily associated with the Yu-Gi-Oh! GX anime and characters like Manjume Thunder, level monsters actually premiered during the DM era. The set was Soul of the Duelist, and it was packed full of this new and weird mechanic. In fact, Konami was so heavily invested in level monsters, they even gave Horus Level 8 the cover of the booster set. That might not seem weird, but keep in mind, not only did Yugi Muto never touch this card, but the Horus monsters never even appeared in the Duel Monsters anime. These new level monsters revolved around the concept of leveling up each turn, whether it be automatically during your standby phase or by fulfilling conditions such as destroying an opponent's monster in battle or landing a direct attack. This would usually allow them to trigger during the end phase. The idea of making your monster progressively stronger each turn was really cool, but in all honesty, it wasn't well suited for competitive play. The biggest reason was fairly obvious: speed. Having to level up twice or sometimes 3 times to reach your boss monster wasn't practical and was just too slow considering each level up represented a full turn. Waiting 2 turns to reach your deck's ace wasn't something many duelists were eager to sign up for. Another issue with most of the level archetypes is that they locked a lot of power when it came to the mid-forms. Look at cards like Armed Dragon level 7, Ultimate Insect level 5, or Mystic Swordsman level 4. These all required one or multiple level ups for marginal power increases that simply weren't worth it. And this isn't even mentioning the fact that your opponent wasn't just going to sit around and put up no opposition. Keeping those level monsters alive so that they could trigger and doing so turn after turn was really difficult. In fact, maybe you could even say damn near impossible. This is why right from the jump of all the level archetypes, and there were many, OCG duelists only saw high potential in one of them, at least from the standpoint of being played as its own deck. Of course, I'm referring to Horus the Black Flame Dragon. To Konami's credit, they led with power right out of the gates and put, by far, the best level archetype in the set that the mechanic premiered in. Horus wasn't perfect and still struggled with some of the flaws I mentioned earlier. However, collectively, the archetype was far better than its peers. First off, unlike Mystic Swordsman, Ultimate Insect, and Armed Dragon, the Horus archetype didn't start with the complete weenie of a monster. While Horus level 4 wasn't the gold standard of 1800 attack, it wasn't a pushover either, wielding a respectable 1600. In addition, level 4 had a very overlooked effect that wouldn't let its control switch. This would actually become incredibly important in future metas due to the rise of monarchs and potent cards like Brain Control, Enemy Controller, and of course the always absurd Snatch Steal. Horus also didn't falter in the mid-range like so many other level themes. Horus level 6 ramped up the offense with 2300 attack and more importantly was completely immune to spell cards. This was massive because level 6 covered so much ground when it came to removal cards that level 4 was susceptible to. Book of Moon, Soul Exchange, and a couple of other soon-to-be mega popular spells I'll cover later were all useless against it. I'll also note that because Horus only needed to kill a single monster in battle to jump right into the spell immune level 6 during the end phase, this meant that the deck didn't feel nearly as slow as other level strategies and could power spike much faster. To double down on that point, Horus was also one of the only level archetypes in the entire game that could level up during the opponent's turn with the aid of cards like Shrink. Lastly, there was its all-world powerful boss monster, an absolute Leviathan. Horus the Black Flame Dragon, level 8. We all know the Yu-Gi-Oh franchise has a clear obsession with Egypt, and Horus is one of the most significant ancient Egyptian deities there is. Believe me when I tell you, Horus level 8 was every bit as powerful as an Egyptian god card. This dragon could negate the activation of all your opponent's spell cards during either player's turn with absolutely no cost associated with it, and he could do this an unlimited amount of times. Let's be real, Horus level 8's effect is pretty phenomenal even by 2022 standards, let alone 2004. This god also had 3000 attack, so not only was it superb for lockdown, but it could also close out games fairly well too. The first builds of Horus were expectedly super aggressive, and duelists loaded up on sizable beaters. Berserk Gorilla was the most notable monster in this deck, as the card was literally all offense. Mystical Space Typhoon was heavily played to deal with back row, especially quick play spells like Book of Moon and Enemy Controller, while the Shrinks would allow every beater in this deck the power to run over even tribute monsters like Monarchs. Royal Decree was clearly one of the deck's best power cards and was perfectly suited for such an aggressive deck. Not only did it allow your Horus monsters the ability to run rampant without fear of battle or power traps, but it also created a near lockdown when Horus level 8 made its arrival. These builds were legitimate, but Horus suffered from a meta that almost seemed like it was designed to counter it. Just as this deck was crammed with the powerful and high utility different dimension monsters, most of the meta decks were too. Warrior Lady and Assailant were both unlimited at this time in the OCG and were incredibly popular. Both monsters, and I guess even plain old DD Warrior for anybody playing that, were gigantic counters to Horus level 6 and 8. Either card could be set or more likely just crashed into Horus to break the lock and slay the dragon. Another huge anchor holding down the Horus deck's playability was the prevalence of the Dark Scorpion Burglar Virus deck. This terror is going to get a video all to its own, so I won't bury the lead here. Just know it was very much a meta deck and was specifically designed and created to utterly destroy and dismantle beatdown decks full of high attack monsters. When the Horus deck was first designed by the players, it wasn't a bad deck. It just couldn't thrive in a meta with so much easy monster removal, and one full of so many poor and unwinnable matchups. Take the Magical Scientist FTK1 for example, another meta deck from this time. Just like the Burglar Virus deck, this was a fight you simply weren't going to consistently win. Scientist FTK could end the game on the very first turn of the duel, and even if Horus went first, what exactly could it do to stop it? Royal Decree was useless versus a deck with no traps, and while level 8 would be auto-win against Magical Scientist, it was impossible to summon during the first turn of a duel. For these reasons, it actually took Horus over a full year to mature into a legitimate meta contender. Over that year, the meta shifted and many cards were added to the OCG's limit regulation list. New competitive challengers also debuted to vie for the throne. When the September 2005 ban list arrived, it shook things up in a major way. The top contending Chaos Mutation deck was issued the heaviest of hits, as well as the top tier Cyberstein OTK. This led to an empty throne that would soon be filled by the ridiculously strong and consistent Gadget archetype, and would ironically lead to Horus being primed to make its meta debut. As the Gadget deck instantly took over and started to dominate the OCG's metagame, duelists naturally looked for answers. Gadgets were so consistent with their near endless supply of monsters and simple removal cards. It was hard to keep up with their tempo control and easy advantage creation. What could possibly stand in their way? Well, what they soon discovered was Horus was actually a complete hard counter. The new builds of Horus adjusted to the times with more sophisticated beaters like Cyber Dragon instead of the old Berserk Gorilla. These builds also heavily teched in copies of Doom Caliber Knight. Just like Shrink in the initial builds of Horus, Doom Caliber Knight would end up being a near possible to get Shonen Jump prize card in the TCG. However, in the OCG, it was super easy to obtain. Doom Caliber Knight's popularity exploded during this format as it was a natural counter to any gadget monster. It could trade itself in exchange for a gadget, and if done early enough in the game, would completely cut off the gadget line and stop it from ever being established. This was also a pretty solid card for protecting your Horus level 6 against threats like Exiled Thurs, Tribe Infecting Virus, or just annoying defender monsters such as DD Warrior Lady and Marshmelon. The card did have to be used very skillfully, as it would actually negate Horus level 8's ability to negate opposing spells, but the benefits hard outweighed the drawbacks. Horus also dominated the gadget matchup due to its natural resistance to simple spot removal spell cards such as Smashing Ground, Hammer Shot, and Fissure. The second a Horus level 6 hit the field, the gadget player honestly was in serious trouble, and that's not even mentioning that Royal Decree would probably make the duel completely one-sided. In this matchup, Horus players also benefited from the fact that getting level 6 was so easy, as level 4 was bigger than any gadget and could trample them at will. You didn't even need to rely on Shrink and could save it here. The Royal Horus deck also held a decisive edge against the Locust Control deck, more commonly known in the TCG as Pac-Man. This was another meta contender during this time. Players had heavily invested in ways of dealing with set monsters during this meta, and the Horus build came equipped for just that with Nobleman of Crossout and Exiled Force. Not to mention, Royal Decree kinda tore through this deck like a hot knife through butter, as it was known to main deck about 20 traps. These overwhelmingly positive matchups against the best deck in the meta and another top tier deck made the Royal Horus deck a top tier meta contender itself. There was one deck that Horus struggled with mightily, and that was Frog Monarchs. This matchup was outright terrible, as Royal Decree did less than nothing, Zaborg could kill both high-level Horus dragons in an instant, and Treeborn Frog pretty much laughed at Doom Caliber Knights, as it could trigger an infinite amount of times in any given standby phase. Luckily, as the Horus deck entered the March 2006 format, that horrendous matchup got a lot better. This was due to the limitation of Treeborn Frog. This update to the limit regulation list also moved DD Assailant to 1, thus nerfing another huge Horus counter, and many debate this is when Horus the Black Flame Dragon entered its true competitive peak. With the third iteration of Horus, the player base had begun dropping Horus level 4 altogether because of its notable lack of power. They did this in favor of a Dark Recruiter engine anchored by Mystic Tomato. Tomato could summon excellent utility monsters like Spirit Reaper, Sangan, Donzalug, and Nudoria. Due to the continued prevalence of gadgets, players also started main decking My Body as a shield as a way to protect the non-Horus monsters. It could also be a solid answer to cards like Exiled Force and Zaborg the Thunder Monarch. Thanks to an improved Monarch matchup and a highly favorable gadget one, Horus was truly at top form and was always considered a strong and solid pick for any competitive tournament. That was until about halfway through the format in June, when the Chimera Tech Overdragon OTK picked up steam. This was probably the worst possible thing that could have happened to Horus. A new contender that was faster and could end the game in a single turn. Forgetting for a moment that the Chimera Tech Overdragon deck was much quicker and more powerful than Horus, it also won the head-to-head battle. Sure, it relied on powerhouse spells like Future Fusion and Overload Fusion, both of which could be negated by Horus the Black Flame Dragon level 8, but that would only be true if they were played after level 8 hit the field. This was very similar to how Horus interacted with the Magical Scientist FTK, and that led to most competitive players dropping the Black Flame strategy completely for this new upstart machine-powered juggernaut. Moving forward, Horus would fall out of the top tier meta and more towards a roguish or tier 2 level. In the next format of September 2006, despite attempted innovation like Devil Frankenstein in the main deck, Horus was unable to recapture its spark and its tier 1 meta status. Part of this was that its super favorable gadget matchup that had made it always such an excellent pick was now almost gone. The format was accelerating and gadgets had no hope of keeping up with Airblade Turbo. Honestly, neither did Horus. Duelists would try one final time in the September 2007 format with an OTK focused mindset that revolved around massive pushes using Future Fusion, Dragon's Mirror, and Frost and Flame Dragon of all things. While nowhere near as competitively successful as prior builds, this might have been one of the most interesting takes on the Horus strategy, as for once, players were putting its fire attribute to work. Dragon's Mirror and Dimension Fusion were both huge kill shots that could instantly end games, and it really felt like, for better or worse, being meta be damned, the Horus deck had retained its hyper-aggressive attack playstyle and identity. Heck, maybe in the end, this build represented that better than any of them. And with that, we are at the end of this wild Yu-Gi-Oh story. I really have to admit, I enjoyed researching this one because Horus actually was a viable rogue and meta deck a lot longer than I would have ever imagined, and some of the later builds were pretty off the wall. With that said, if you enjoyed the video, or more importantly, you learned something, give the video a big thumbs up. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Check out the other stories I think you'll enjoy that are on the screen right now. And of course, thanks for watching.